Hey.
All right, I think we're going to get started. Hopefully that's working. Welcome to Introduction to Winter Hiking. This workshop is geared towards three-season hikers who are looking to start getting into the winter hiking season. It could also be a refresher for experienced hikers. We're just going to pretty much go over the basics of how to get started winter hiking with risk factors to think about, clothing, layering, food, water, basic gear. And we had a really big response to this workshop, and I think a lot of people giving these workshops did. So we're really happy that so many people are looking into getting into winter hiking. It's probably Frank and I's favorite season. So it's really good to, to learn more about it and about, how to keep yourself safe, just because the risk factors, there's more of them in the winter. And Frank and I have done this workshop for a few years now. We usually do it in person. We have, a table filled with our gear that we show and demonstrate and talk about. So being that this is online, we're trying to be creative and do the best that we can. So I did make a couple of no budget home videos that will be on layering and boot traction. And we are currently Facebook in live streaming to Facebook, which has about a 20-second delay, I believe. Hopefully I did that right. It's my first time. So if anybody's tuning in there, hopefully it is working, but this is recording and it'll be available after. So we're going to start out. This is our agenda. So we're going to introduce ourselves, and then we have a couple of polls that we're going to put up on the screen, just sort of to gauge everybody's relative experience level and what you're looking to get out of this workshop. And then Frank is going to start us off with the basics of winter hiking. So just to start out, my name is Denise Fredette. I am a 4-season trip leader. I've been a trip leader since 2013. I lead mostly day hikes and backpacking trips. I have hiked all of the 48 4,000 footers in New Hampshire, all in winter, and I'm working on hiking all of the New England 100 highest in winter. I have about 20 left. And we're hiking most weekends. And when I joined the AMC in 2012, I had made some friends who were winter hikers, and they're like, "Oh, just wait until winter. It's going to be so much fun." I'm like, "No, I'm going to hang up my hiking gear in October and November and hibernate because I don't like cold. I don't like winter." And then a few months later, I found myself at a winter hiking workshop. And then on New Year's Day, I was hiking my first mountain in the winter, North Kearsarge in North Conway, New Hampshire. And I made some mistakes. I dressed way too warmly, even though it was very cold at the trailhead. And I learned a lot. And now hiking's my favorite season. So, if I can share some of what I've learned with others, hopefully I can do that. So, and now Frank's gonna just sort of introduce himself.
Yeah, I'm Frank Brooks. I'm a volunteer leader for the AMC chapter of Maine. I hike pretty extensively, and I love hiking in the wintertime. I've hiked all the 4,000 footers in New England in the wintertime and love spending time outdoors in the wintertime. So I heartily endorse everyone being here to learn about winter hiking. Once you start doing it, you're sure to love it, I think. Yeah, so just a couple pieces of housekeeping before we continue on. We have one report of someone saying they're having a hard time hearing us. if there's anybody else having that problem, if you could let us know. I'm not sure what we can do about it, but just be good to know if folks can hear us, if others can hear us or not. If you do have any questions for us, there's a Q&A widget down on probably in the little taskbar at the bottom of the interface in Zoom. If you could put any questions you have in there, it's easy for us to keep track of them in there instead of the chat. Good. It looks like the audio problem is resolved, so that's good to hear. If you do have questions for us, please put them in the QA widget because it's easy for us to track what's going on. Easiest to keep track of the questions down there and be sure that everyone's questions get answered. So I think, why don't we go ahead, and we have a couple polls we're going to throw out here to help us learn a little bit about you guys. If you can just want to gauge your experience level and kind of what your goals are for this workshop. So this is the first poll. I'm just about to launch it. So hopefully you should be seeing a poll on your screen. And give you guys a few minutes, a few seconds to answer that guy. All right. Okay. So it looks like it says share the results. I don't know if folks are hopefully seeing the results. Looks like we have a majority of people, or the largest group of people here have snowshoed a bit, looks like, but maybe are looking to do maybe something a little more challenging on snowshoes perhaps. And some folks who are just starting out, which is great. You've made a great choice to start getting out in the wintertime. It's a perfect time of year to be outdoors. So that's great. And because we have a few people who already know the joy of being out in wintertime. All right, and we have one other poll here where we're going to gauge your goals for the workshop. I'll put that up. Alrighty. Looks like the numbers have stabilized. So there's results. Yeah. So it looks like the majority of people are looking to be sure they're prepared and to get out there and have a safe and enjoyable time. And we are definitely going to cover. We are definitely covering. We'll be covering that. So and I think we'll have something for folks who are looking to refresh their skills as well, and learn the basics. So I think it's good to know. All right. So why don't we go ahead here and get started? So go back one. Go there. Yeah, we'll go here. Cool. So.
Oh, just one thing, Frank.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you were able to change the screen, so let me know when you want me to change screen.
Okay. Yep. I will prompt you. Yes. Yeah. So great. Great. So try to do this interactively. Usually I ask this question to folks in the room that we're in. So what we'll try here is if what do folks think is different about hiking in the wintertime? And if you could go ahead and put your answers in the chat widget, not the QA widget, but the chat widget. If you could go ahead and let me think what you think might be different about the wintertime. Snow, definitely. Cold, definitely. The need for traction, definitely. Yeah, respect the weather, definitely. See, sweat management, we're definitely going to talk about that. Less daylight hours, yes. Yep. Risk of exposure, absolutely. Yep. Need for layering. Weather, yeah, weather is definitely important. We're going to definitely talk. Great, yeah. Go ahead and advance a slide there, Denise. Yeah, so a lot of people mention these things. Yeah, so the first thing, it's colder in the wintertime, no doubt. There's that the temperature though may present challenges in a way that are you might not quite expect. In that most people think hiking in cold weather, the challenge is going to be staying warm enough because it's cold outside. But as we'll talk about later today, one of the major considerations you have to consider when you're out there is in fact getting too warm can in fact be a challenge. So the cold temperatures do present a challenge, but it's often a challenge in how you manage your sweat, which was someone was talking about. Somebody mentioned in the chat. Um, in addition to that, the wind. I don't know if anyone mentioned wind, but wind is an aspect of winter travel that in many ways is probably in my mind is the single biggest indicator of your comfort in the wintertime. Oftentimes being out in cold temperature, you get you could be out in single digits on a sunny day with no wind. And that's a surprisingly comfortable place to be, actually. But you throw in 20 or 30 miles an hour wind to that situation, and it becomes immediately less comfortable and can quickly become dangerous, in fact. So wind is an extremely important thing to consider in the wintertime. Precipitation, somebody mentioned snow. Snow is certainly a lot of snow in the wintertime. But in New England here, you also have to be conscious of the fact that we oftentimes get borderline uh, borderline precipitation conditions where we get icing or even get rain in the wintertime. And that can present an additional challenge that beyond even snow. Snow is sometimes I would say oftentimes always preferable to ice or rain actually in the wintertime because it's in many ways a much more benign condition to deal with. Somebody mentioned the shorter days in the chat. That is certainly a concern in the wintertime. You don't have the same amount of daylight that you have when you're hiking in the summertime. So that means you can often have to start in the dark, and you need to be prepared for the fact that you might be out in the dark afterwards if you're on a long hike. So you need to be cognizant of the fact that you should always have some kind of a headlamp or flashlight with you whenever you hike, always, no matter when. But in the wintertime, that becomes extra critical because your chance of being in the dark is far more likely in the wintertime. So all of those weather conditions then translate into some challenging trail conditions as well. Snow and ice on the trails can reduce the traction you would normally have just with your boots in the summertime or the fall or the spring. So you need to deal with that. And we're going to talk about equipment that you can use to help you to make sure that you stay safe out there, to give yourself traction on a variety of different surfaces like snow and ice. There are a couple options for traction there, and we're going to talk about all of those coming up. You can also understand one thing to be concerned about in the wintertime too is that there can be a great deal of variability in the trailhead between the trailhead and the summit on a hike. Sometimes conditions can be much more benign down at the trailhead than they are at the summit. This can particularly be in terms of wind and temperature. There can be a great difference, but also if there's a temperature gradient, there could be a difference in precipitation between the trailhead and the summit. So that's always a concern to be aware of. And we're going to talk about good sources for weather information where you can pinpoint these sort of forecasts to see how the weather might vary between the summit and the trailhead. There are resources to help you do that online. And then finally, also the trail navigation can be made more challenging in the wintertime when you're out there. because the trails are not necessarily always obvious in the wintertime as they are in the summertime. In the summertime, most trails that are maintained have a fairly wide corridor that you're sort of walking down, and those can often be obvious because you have 8 feet of cleared trail over your head in front of you, cleared branches off of the trees in front of you. But when you're standing on 5 feet of snow, suddenly that corridor doesn't become quite as obvious. And you can oftentimes have some challenges in terms of finding the trail and remaining on the trail. Not to mention also that blaze that was 4 feet up the tree in the summertime is now buried under a foot of snow. So that as well can present a challenge to navigation. So that's an additional difference in the additional challenge in the wintertime. So I go ahead and advance a slide here. Somebody asked when it's too windy. We will talk about that in a few minutes here. So in thinking about all those sort of challenges of the winter environment that we were talking about, what kind of how do we think that would affect a hiker out in the snow and the wind and the rain, and such? In the chat, maybe tell me what you think. Disoriented? Sure, getting lost is a big challenge. High energy. Yep, you wanna be sure you're keeping energy up. You could get lost. Yep, definitely. Yep. Wind chill reduces temperature. Yes. Yep. Wind chill is definitely a challenge. Water, your drinks freeze. Your food can freeze. Yep. Good, good. Why don't you go ahead and advance the slide there, Denise? Hypothermia. Yep. We'll talk about that. Yeah, definitely. So yeah, so hypothermia right at the top of the list there. That's certainly a challenge. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Frostbite, it's another cold injury. That's a big one that you need to be cognizant of out in the winter. Dehydration, and also this should probably say need for high energy food, is really a dehydration is a risk, and keeping your energy up in order to keep yourself warm. That's a challenge in the wintertime. In fact, some people don't realize that actually dehydration most people associate dehydration with hot, humid weather because you're sweating so much and you're losing a lot of fluid that way, and it's warm and such. But in fact, dehydration is as large a risk in the wintertime as it is in the summertime because of the dryness in the air that just actually can suck the humidity out of you. So you need to be and particularly suck humidity out of your skin. And that's a great contributor to frostbite. So that's one thing about dehydration that people sometimes forget about the wintertime. There are hazardous trail conditions in the wintertime, no doubt. The ice and the snow that we're talking about, that you encounter can create challenging traction. And so we're going to talk coming up about how you address that. And we'll talk about how you address all of these things coming up. Finding trail and breaking trail. Those are definitely more challenging in the wintertime. You can require a lot of energy in the wintertime. If you encounter the need to break through a lot of snow, that requires a lot of energy. So you need to be very cognizant of eating a lot of food when you're out there in the wintertime to keep your energy level up. So we're going to talk about food coming up here in a few minutes as well. So, and then we're going to also talk about traction, snowshoes, spikes, and crampons. These are a little preview of the traction discussion. Those are the 3 main categories of traction that we're going to talk about. So those help you with, and we'll be discussing that coming up. So the next thing we're going to do is we're just going to drill in a little bit deeper on a couple of these risks, just because they are really important to understand, particularly the hypothermia and frostbite. So we're going to do, if you want to go ahead and advance these slides. These next couple slides are a little intimidating, and they're meant to be a little serious, because these are serious risks of being out in the wintertime. Probably some of the biggest risks of being out in the wintertime that you need to be prepared to deal with. So hypothermia, somebody had mentioned this, a couple of people mentioned this in the chat, is one of the major challenges, risks in the wintertime. So hypothermia is basically your body core temperature dropping to a dangerous level. And the human body functions within a fairly small temperature range. Actually, it doesn't take doesn't take a large drop in your body's temperature for it to start to impact you. And so the signs of hypothermia are things like confusion, difficulty speaking, uncontrollable shivering, sort of lethargy, and an inability to move. So if you see any of those conditions in the people you're hiking with, it's definitely a serious condition that needs to be addressed. And so an important thing to take away from here is that, as I said before, wind is probably your single biggest indicator of comfort in the wintertime will be wind. And so hypothermia is often the greatest danger when you combine wet clothing with windy conditions. That's usually the fastest way for someone to end up in hypothermia. And to be clear, hypothermia is not only a winter problem. In fact, most people who succumb to hypothermia actually do so when the temperature is above freezing. So there are people who get hypothermic in July in the White Mountains. So in the wintertime, you can understand it even a bigger risk in the wintertime. So as with any of these things, probably the most important thing with hypothermia is don't get hypothermic to begin with. And so if you want to advance this next slide here. So key things in preventing hypothermia, checking the weather. Don't put yourself out in conditions that will promote hypothermia. That's definitely conditions where there's a lot of wind and there is a lot of wet precipitation. The combination of those two are sort of things to look out for in terms of dangerous hypothermia weather. And so oftentimes that's not necessarily snow and wind. Oftentimes this is kind of one of those things where when I talked about the challenge of temperature may not be quite what you expected, is that when I look for bad hypothermia weather, I'm thinking marginally freezing temperatures with mixed precipitation, rain, wind, like right above freezing. Those are, to me, are really the most dangerous hypothermia conditions. Not that hypothermia can't happen at any temperature range, but those in particular, that combination of wet, windy, somewhat cold temperatures are oftentimes the worst. So it's important to gather weather information before you go. And we're going to talk about sources for weather information later here. Dressing properly for the conditions. This is going to be talking about, Denise is going to talk later about layering and about appropriate fabrics to have your clothing made from. And we'll get to that. Staying hydrated and fed. Your body is a furnace that needs to be stoked in the wintertime to keep your core temperature up. And so it's extremely important that you keep hydrating and you keep eating in order to keep that furnace going. And that will help you. And we're going to talk about nutrition and food coming up here as well. Staying dry. Again, let's talking about that sort of rainy condition when it's kind of cold. That's dangerous. A piece of wet clothing generally will suck the heat out of you faster than a piece of dry clothing. You can definitely address that by the materials that your clothing is made from, but even a good piece of wicking clothing that's wet is not going to keep you as warm as a nice piece of wicking clothing that's dry. So staying dry is extremely critical. And then taking bio breaks. Bio breaks are that's our euphemism for bathroom breaks on the trail. In fact, regulating your body temperature by removing the fluids you no longer need in your body, shall we say, is an important part of keeping your body temperature in a good place during the winter time. And so we're going to go on now to the next slightly scarier looking slide, which is about the other. Oh, we're going to talk about wind chills here for a second. Let's go on. Let's go ahead one more slide here, Denise, and we'll come back to this wind chill chart in a second here. I remember last year I was thinking to myself, we should move this wind chill chart. Frostbite. So frostbite is another serious danger of being out in the wintertime that you need to be concerned about. Frostbite is a cold injury, basically where the outer layer of your skin, the tissue beneath it, starts to freeze. And it generally happens in your extremities are generally at the greatest risk: fingers, ears, nose, toes. But that doesn't mean it can't happen on the core part of your body. It can happen on the core part of your body as well. So it's definitely something to be concerned of. There are sort of varying levels of frostbite, and this graph gives this picture over on the right hand side here just gives you a sense of what those are. A frost nip, which is kind of a redness in a superficial kind of freezing, that's sort of a redness in the outer layer. There's a superficial frostbite where you start to see a graying and a blistering on the skin. And then there's deep frostbite, which is where it turns dark. And that's the most serious. Frostbite, something to keep an eye out for. Again, your best bet is preventing it from happening before it happens. If we go to the next slide, we'll talk here a bit about preventing it. Again, it sounds kind of like hypothermia, preventing it. Check the weather. Make sure you're particularly watching the temperature and the wind and the wind chill. The wind chill can be a huge cause of frostbite. So wind is something, again, here to watch. Staying hydrated, staying fed. Again, your body needs to be producing heat, and hydrating makes sure that your skin is not drying out, because that dehydration actually contributes to frostbite. So you want to be sure to stay well hydrated. Again, dressing for the conditions. Make sure you're wearing the right clothing. Make sure it's staying dry. That's, again, important. These are themes, sort of general themes you come back to always in winter hiking. And then minimizing the exposure of your skin. When those conditions are super cold, you want to make sure that skin doesn't get exposed, so that you don't get frostbite. And so wind chill, again, I said, was a huge indicator in terms of frostbite and when there's a danger of frostbite. So Denise, if you want to go back to that wind chill chart for a second now is the appropriate time for that wind chill chart. So this is just your standard NOAA wind chill chart. You can find this online. I'm sure you can find a variety of sources online. So a number that we're going to throw around, somebody I believe asked in the chat, when is it too cold? So I like to keep the -15 wind chill in mind as sort of a boundary number to think about. And what is -15? If you look at this chart right here, you'll notice -15 is kind of that first boundary between the light blue and the slightly darker blue. And that slightly darker blue, if you look at the legend down here on the chart, is where your skin starts to freeze in 30 minutes. And so obviously these are guidelines. This is sort of the average person, right? Your mileage will vary in terms of how long it might take your exposed skin to freeze in these temperatures. But as a general guideline, we sort of throw around -15-degree wind chill as a point where you really need to start thinking about whether you're prepared to be out in those conditions. I've personally been out in far worse conditions than these, but I felt I could handle it, and I was with people who I knew could handle it, who were experienced enough to handle it. So, it's not necessarily -15, don't go outdoors. It's in your experience, what have you handled and what do you know you can handle? If you've never been out in those kind of conditions, I would encourage you to not just charge out in those conditions and perhaps gain some experience before you're heading out in conditions like that. Uh, but those are a good thing to keep in mind. And we can talk. We'll show you in the weather sources we're going to talk about. We can show you, where you can find out this information about what wind chill is, what the wind chill is, and what the temperatures are, what the wind's going to be, and all that kind of stuff. So, and if I'm not mistaken, I think that might be the next slide. Actually, is our weather talk. So these are a couple good sources for weather information. My go-to place for weather information is weather.gov. That is the National Weather Service of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration of the US government. They produce detailed forecasts for the entire United States. And they produce something called a point forecast, which is a really good way to get, remember I said you could get detailed information about like how the temperature, what forecast is going to vary from the trailhead up to the summit. I think maybe we can show weather.gov in a minute here and show you what a point forecast looks like. Yeah, great. So this is weather.gov. So if I was going to say I was going to hike Mount Washington, which, let's see, that's I would type in Mount Washington up here, and they've should actually be here. Yeah, Mount Washington, New Hampshire, right there. Go ahead and do that. It's going to drop me into a forecast that's pretty close to Mount Washington. So, yep, there we go. And this gives you a good overview of everything. So this is sort of the text forecast. And this is good to give you kind of a summary, sort of an idea of what the weather is going to be like up there. And this generally is a good summary of the information. So like you see right here on Thursday, tells you right there, you got a wind chill as low as -12. And gusts as high as 75 miles per hour. Those are definitely temperature and wind numbers that catch my attention as being dangerous immediately. So that's a good thing. So the other thing you can see here now over on the right hand side, you'll see this map up here. So this is where the point forecast, you see that little green box there. So that green box is sort of the area that this forecast applies to, basically, right? So now if Denise were to click maybe down in the valley there on down on 302 there, down in the valley, and you click on that, you'll see we get a much different forecast down here. If you scroll down here for Thursday, the winds are 10 miles per hour out of the southeast with sunny and a high near 38, right? Now we're just a few miles away from where we were in that other forecast, right? But it's an entirely different forecast, right? And so that's a really important thing here, that you can see that down on the road, it's way different than it is up on that summit. That summit is dangerous, but down on the road, it's fairly benign. So when you're looking for weather information, you want to be sure to not only check the summit that you're going to, but also check sort of points around it, or don't only check the trailhead or the biggest town near the trailhead. Make sure you're going out and actually checking the summit on this point forecast. It's a good one. And the other thing I would point down to is, if you scroll down here a bit, is it also gives you a graph, this hourly weather forecast that's down on the right here. Yeah, go ahead and click on that. This gives you a graph that gives you a lot of detail about basically a graph over time of all of that weather information. Because while the text format is a good summary, it can say things like take, for example, precipitation, right? The forecast for tonight might say something like, oh, there's a 47% chance of rain. Well, there's a 47% chance of rain at 9 p.m., but that by midnight, it's like 2%. That kind of a subtlety can be very useful to understand that the summary sometimes gives you a broader view of the information, that you can get greater detail here to understand how things are going to change over time. Perhaps it's going to be really windy first thing in the morning, but by the time you make the summit, it's going to be perfectly fine. That can impact your decision to go up the mountain, or the opposite. It could be perfectly, calm in the morning, but by the time you get to the summit, the wind's really going to be ripping. And so that may be a good indication you don't want to go. So this is a really great resource for finding that weather information. This is my starting point, pretty much my starting and ending point for a lot of the weather information I do, because it gives good detail. So to go back to the slide, a couple other, somebody mentioned Mountain Forecast. That's another website. I personally haven't used that much. I know other people who have used that one. The Mount Washington Observatory, this gives you a high mountains forecast as well as the conditions on the top of Washington. This can be useful as sort of a broad overview, I think, of information. You know, be cognizant of the fact that the top of Mount Washington is going to be a worst case scenario. If the only forecast you ever looked at in the wintertime was Mount Washington's to decide where you were going, you would probably never go hiking in the wintertime, because that would be it would scare you away, because the weather on top of Mount Washington is oftentimes the worst of the worst. And there are many other places you can go that are less benign and still get outdoors in the wintertime. And then avalanches. So there's limited avalanche terrain in New England that you need to be concerned about. This Mount Washington Avalanche Center provides detailed avalanche forecasts for the ravines on the eastern side of Mount Washington, because those are the largest and most consistent avalanche zones in New England. That's not to say there aren't other places where there are potential avalanche conditions. If you ever go to the basins around Mount Katahdin in Maine, that's avalanche territory as well. But there's no official avalanche forecast up there. So you need to be, if you do go into those places, you need to be prepared to understand the avalanche risk yourself. You know, so avalanches are something to be cognizant of, particularly if you're going to the few places in New England where they are a risk. They're not as broad a risk as they are out in the West, certainly in the Northeast, but it's something to be aware of as in certain places. Yeah, so, you know, definitely check this weather. Be sure you're checking the weather over time. It can change. If I'm going hiking on a weekend in the wintertime, I generally start early in the week to start to get a sense of what the weather looks like where I'm thinking of going. And then I keep monitoring it over the week to see kind of what direction it's trending, to see if it's getting better. Is it getting worse? Is it moving later, earlier in the weekend? That kind of stuff. So be really being safe in the winter. Planning a safe trip in the wintertime always starts with, for me, always starts with the weather. That's where I start with for planning a safe trip in the winter. So great. And then, so I think that's all. I don't know if you have anything to add about weather, Denise. So we talked about,
covered it.
Okay, cool. So I don't know if I think this is maybe my last slide. Yeah, we talked about the challenges of navigating in the wintertime, because the trail markers you're used to can often be buried. This here is a picture demonstrating it. This is Denise on the same summit 1 year apart, North Crocker Mountain up in Carrabassett Valley. You can see 1 year, the trail sign, we had to dig the trail sign out in order to get to it. I happen to have been on that hike on the left-hand side. But we were wandering around trying to find the trail sign, and somebody kicked it finally to find it, and we had to dig it out to see it. And then you see a year later, it's 2 feet higher than it was before, because there's 2 feet less snow. So that's sort of emblematic of the challenges of navigation in the wintertime. Just imagine that's, blazes are buried under trees, or the obvious trail corridor that you're in before. In the summertime, when there's a clear canopy of trees over you, you might be walking up in that canopy of trees now. So it's not necessarily obvious to you. So you need to be good with a map. It's always good to have experience, being with people who are experienced, who've been there before. You often have clues about being familiar with the place. Technology can help you. No doubt, GPSs or people with smartphones and Gaia and such applications, those can certainly be a great a great help in those conditions. Just you need to remember that technology can fail in the wintertime. There's challenges with the cold. The cold affects your electronics as well as it affects you. It can cause your batteries to die a lot faster, and you can uh, run out of it, power, and you can cease having that aid. So just if you're relying on, don't solely rely on it as your only source of navigational information. Be prepared. So I think I'll turn it over to you here. I think you're gonna start to talk about clothing.
Yeah.
As the next step, because I think as we talked about with the frostbite and hypothermia, that one of the prime ways to prevent any of those conditions happening to you is to make sure that you dress properly. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Denise.
Absolutely. Thank you, Frank.
Of course. Yeah.
So we have a list here. It's a pretty basic list for clothing layers in the winter. And everyone's different, so this is by no means the end all be all. The first thing, no cotton. We recommend poly blends and wool for your layers, just because cotton, it holds water, and if you start sweating, it's much harder to dry out and stay warm in the winter. So using polys and wool blends. And a lot of people think in the winter the problem is trying to stay warm. I had mentioned at the beginning that when on my first winter hike, I was wearing too much, way too much. You don't need snow pants. It's all about layering and taking things off when you get cold, starting with your hat and putting things on, taking things off when you get hot and putting things on when you get cold. And your hat is usually the first thing you take on and put off, take off. So I created a video. Please bear with me. This is just me showing the different layers that I would put on if I was going to go above tree lines. So I'm going to start that, and hopefully the volume in the video come through. Hi, we're going to talk a little bit about clothing and layering now. So I am currently wearing my base layer, the layer closest to my skin. It's non-cotton, synthetic. I am wearing sock liners underneath my wool hiking socks. Base layers usually come in light, medium, and heavyweight. I usually start out on the light and the medium and just add layers, because when you have your base layer being heavy, it's harder to regulate your temperature if you start to get hot. So a great feature with a lot of hiking shirts is also that they have thumb holes, so you can cover your wrists a little bit more. It's just an added layer of protection. So we have this, and so my next layer would be my hiking pants, my soft shell hiking pants. And you can wear your free season hiking pants for a lot of the winter hiking, just over sort of a pair of long johns. And that should be fine. So we've got this, and the next thing we do I'll start with the shoes. So we recommend hiking shoes between 200 and 400 grams of insulation. So I'm going to put on my 200-gram insulated hiking boots now. And I'll really quickly show you, these are the 400 grams. I would wear them probably single-digit temperatures and below zero. They're thicker, they're warmer, and they're usually pretty good. And if I needed anything else, I'd probably throw in a pair of chemical foot warmers. These are mountaineering boots. These are more for technical terrain. They actually have little grooves to clip in crampons. I don't wear these very often. For most hiking, when you're starting out, you won't need to worry about mountaineering boots. I just wanted to show you that that's what these are. So this is optional, but I recommend getting a pair of leg gaiters. So the leg gaiters just go on and Velcro in the front, and they help keep the snow out of your boots and keep your lower half of your legs a little drier. So I pretty much always wear my leg gaiters in the winter. My next layer is my fleece. When it gets a little bit colder, I'll put this on. And my next layer, this is what I call my puffy, and I will usually only wear this at the very beginning of the hike in the parking lot, or during long stops, or at the summit, because it's usually too hot to wear this while hiking. So this is a down puffy, and they usually come in down or synthetic. The thing about the down is that it's usually lighter weight, a little bit more packable. It does cost a little bit more, and it's not quite as weather resistant. There's also a synthetic option for this insulating layer, and that's usually a little bit more affordable. It's not always as lightweight or as packable, although they are making it, technology's coming a long way, and it is more weather resistant. So those are things to think about when choosing your insulating layer. The next layer is my hard shell. This is going to protect me from the wind and the rain. And I get my hard shell big enough to go over all of my layers, though you won't always need to wear it over all of your layers. It really depends on a lot of environmental factors. And this also has pit zips, which are optional, but it helps with ventilation. If I need my hard shell going uphill and it's getting too hot, I'll, take down my pit zip and just ventilate a little bit. I usually carry 2 hats, a lighter weight one and a heavier weight one. The heavier weight one is for the summit. I also carry rain pants, which are the hard shell from the bottom, and I'm not going to put them on now, but these are full zip rain pants, and they really actually help with the warmth when it's windy out, and if it's inclement weather, and if your butt's sliding, they help keep your butt a little bit dry and less cold. So the next thing that we have are the gloves. I have my glove liners. I also carry an extra pair of just mitten gloves in case my glove liners get wet. And then when it's really cold and at the summit, I have my bigger mittens. And because my hands tend to get really cold when I stop moving for any period of time, about 20 minutes before I reach the summit, I'll take a pair of hand warmers, the chemical hand warmers, and I'll throw them in my mittens. And then when I get to the summit and I have to do things, my hands aren't numb. So that's that. And now we get to the summit, and it's windy and it's freezing cold, and I have my face mask. And some people have a balaclava, which goes over all of their face, but my face mask goes like this. And I also have my ski goggles, so I'll put those on. So I have my face covered, and then I'll ask my friend, hey, do you see any skin? And they might point out some skin. And that's to protect against things like frostbite. So here I am, and this is basically layering.
So that's my little home video, and I want to thank my videographer husband for being so patient with the takes. So as you can see, it's all about layering, and I sometimes wear cold weather running tights with my base layer underneath that and an insulated hiking skirt. So it's all about doing what you feel comfortable with, just avoiding cotton. What else was like? Oh, and as far as putting things on, like your face mask and your ski goggles, that's for if you were above tree line and it was negative wind chill, and there was a risk of possible frost nip or frostbite. That's when you would take care. But that's basically it. And a lot of things you can work with are things that you already own, and just bringing more, and carrying like an extra pair of long johns or an extra pair of
socks. I always carry extra socks in my pack year round. So that is clothing.
I think it's worth driving home the point too that you're carrying most of that clothing most of the time. Is that in order to not overheat, you'll spend most of your time with very little of that clothing on, but you sort of need to have it when you stop, pretty much. So
Right, exactly. So having a pack big enough, knowing that you're going to store your clothing. Thanks, Frank. And knowing where in your pack you're putting your clothes, like your big mittens right before the summit, knowing where that is. So that's an important consideration. And we'll also take questions at the end on that. So the recommended equipment for winter hiking are snowshoes. And in the next slides, I'll actually show you a few different kinds of snowshoes. And they usually come in metal or plastic frames with crampons, which are like teeth on the bottom of the snowshoe, usually in the center and on the sides. The wooden shoes are suitable for flat terrain only. And then traction devices, and we'll show you the difference between micro spikes and crampons and when you might need one or the other. Poles, you can use ski poles or your trekking poles with those slightly bigger winter baskets so they don't slide all the way through the snow. And those are helpful, especially when you're snowshoeing. A backpack, it's recommended 40 plus liters. I know a lot of people who use 60, 65 liters, which are great. I used to use that. My current pack is 38 liters. What you want to do is make sure that you can fit all the clothes when you're not wearing them, your food, water, first aid kit, everything, and a way to strap your snowshoes to your pack when you're not wearing them, because there may be times when a trail is so packed out and well used that you don't need your snowshoes. So a lot of people put their snowshoes with compression straps on one on each side of their pack. Some people use bungee cords and tack it to the back. I do what I call sort of the lazy way. Sometimes I put both of my snowshoes under the top part of my pack, which I call the brain, and then secure it. It's harder to get into your pack for things. Sometimes you have to remove them. But if, for instance, your hands get really cold, like mine do, and it's harder for me to operate straps, that's just sort of my easy way when I'm taking them off mid-hike.
I think you can see that. Sorry to interrupt, but in that picture there on the right-hand side, Chris over the guy on the right-hand side there, you'll see he's got his snowshoes sort of strapped to the side of his pack.
Yep.
And I think if you look at, I think Katie there, the second, she has them kind of under the brain of her pack right
Yep.
there. So you sort of see a couple styles of carrying your snowshoes there. Yeah.
I don't really like the one where you put them all the way on the back of your pack, where you stack them and have them at the very back of your pack, just because it throws off balance a little bit. But that is another way to do it. And carrying a headlamp, and I recommend, carrying extra batteries for that headlamp. And a lot of people carry a spare headlamp in addition to their headlamp, because as Frank had mentioned earlier, we have less daylight in the winter. So you may be starting your hike or ending your hike in the dark. And a foam pad. And when we do group hikes, we always carry a foam pad, and that's in case there's an emergency and somebody needs to sit down or lay down. You're not doing that right on the ground because you're losing a lot of heat. So getting somebody, if there's an emergency, getting somebody off of the ground is so important. Or if you had to sort of shelter if there was an emergency, carrying a foam pad, I think, is really important. And I've also put a sleeping bag. When we do our backcountry hikes, when they're day hikes, more than a couple of miles from where 911 can easily reach you, carrying a 0-degree sleeping bag is important in the winter. I actually carry something called a blizzard bag that I got a few years ago, and I think it's rated around 0 degrees, and it's in a vacuum sealed pouch. I haven't had to use it. It's sort of a single use, but having that, just being prepared for whatever might happen, and if you had to spend the night, it would be a very uncomfortable night, but something that would help you survive for the backcountry. And hand and feet chemical warmers. If your feet are getting cold, throwing in the foot warmers. And I think I had mentioned in my video before the summit, I'll throw in hand warmers in my mittens so that when I get there, because we've stopped and we're gonna get cold really fast, my hands won't be as cold. And also, I use my cell phone as a camera solely, so the battery drains really, really fast in the winter. So sometimes when it's doing that, I'll throw it in a pocket with a hand warmer and the battery lasts longer. So those are some recommended equipment for winter hiking. Okay, so I've created another video, and this is boot traction for ice and snow. And I have named some brands that are popular with a lot of hikers, but that is by no means an exhaustive list. You could probably get some pretty good traction elsewhere. I just tend to rely on brands that a lot of other hikers tend to prefer and like, because I feel like they'll last longer. And I really want to, when you're going out hiking, you really kind of want to invest in things that are going to not fail on you when you need them in these conditions. So I'm going to start this video, and so here we go. Hey, we're going to talk a little bit about foot traction now. We're going to start out with the least aggressive foot traction. These are yak tracks. You might have also heard of stabilizers, which are similar. These have metal coils and the plastic frame that you sort of slip onto your boots. Stabilizers have like these little screws on a plastic frame that you slip onto your boots, and these are really good for walking to the mailbox in an icy driveway, or for flat or gently rolling terrain. They're not really good for hiking any sort of elevation. We tend to find stabilizers and sometimes yak tracks on the trails in the winter, or hang from a sign at the trailhead, because they tend to fall off of feet, off of your boots. So we don't really recommend these for any sort of elevation, but they are an option for sort of flat walking trails with not too much ice. The next step up these are Catula micro spikes, and you can see the spikes that they have on them. And a lot of people wear these for hiking mountains, and they're great. They just sort of slip on your feet. There's an indication for front there. And these are good for a lot of hiking in the mountains in New England. And the newer ones actually have thinner plastic going around, but Catula in general makes a pretty good product. And there's a similar one that Hillsound puts out that I don't have with me at the moment. Hillsound also does these are the Hillsound Trail Pro crampons. They are not a true crampon, but they are a bit more aggressive than the Catulas, as you can see the difference in the spikes. And these also indicate front, and they just slip on your boots. And I use these for the majority of my hiking in the 4,000 footers in the mountains in New England. So those are a good option. Now, true crampons we have here. These are the Gribble 10 plus 2 points. And as you can see, they're pretty aggressive. And for people just starting out winter hiking, you don't have to worry about these. You're not going to need these for most of what you're going to do. I probably use them maybe 2 or 3 times in an entire season. Usually sort of the Northern Presidentials or something with really, really thick ice. And these particular ones can go on both mountaineering boots and the regular insulated winter hiking boots. And they have the anti-baller plate. So that's an option once you get into the bigger mountains, more technical terrain. So now we're going to talk about snowshoes. We're going to start out with they're unisex, but pretty much the men's version, MSR Lightning Ascent. They've got a metal frame. This is sort of the old binding system. They've actually upgraded that since then. I just don't have a sample right now. And they have a really cool function we call the televator. It's a heel lift. So this reduces the stress on your calves and your legs when you're going uphill. And on the back, these are sort of the crampons of the snowshoe. And we've got So the points here in the center in the front, and then points along the sides, and another point through the center. And that's really important when you're hiking mountains in New England, to have these points of contact to really grip and get you up there. I think this might be a 30-inch snowshoe. Then we have the woman's version of the MSR Lightning Axis. These are also metal frame. It's a slightly newer binding, but I think they've also upgraded this since this came out, because I think this might be like 4 or 5 years old. And it also has the televator, and the women's ones tend to be sort of slimmer, just I guess the way that we walk. And they also have the crampons in the similar spaces on the side and the center. So that's another option. The ones I use most often, by the way, these are 25-inch, and that is according to my weight. How it's good for breaking trail when you have a longer snowshoe. I tend to sort of trip over them occasionally, so I actually prefer these. Are the Tubbs Flex Alps. They've got a plastic frame. I love the binding system. I just sort of put my foot in here and I tighten this up and then button it and then tighten this up. And it's also got the heel lift. And I'll show you the back. These are the crampons. And as you can see, the Tubbs and the MSR, the Tubbs have slightly more aggressive center crampons and the sides, and they even have more here in the back. So I really like these for what I do. And there are a lot of options. Local stores, big box stores sell snowshoes, LL Bean, and they have some good ones there, but you really want to make sure that you have, for any sort of elevation, a snowshoe that works for the conditions, that it's stable on your feet. If you're going to do anything with elevation, it has crampons on the sides and the front at least. And something that you could easily put on your feet with while you're wearing mittens or gloves, because sometimes it's just freezing cold. So you want to be able to manipulate this easily while you have things on your hands. So these are some of the options. There are other options out there, but these are the most common ones that people use to hike in New England.
So that is the basics of boot traction. And you could pretty much find things anywhere, and we'll also take questions for those. But yeah, having a snowshoe with good traction underneath and good teeth is good if you're going to do things with elevation. Flat and rolling terrain, you could probably get by with a little bit less. Now we're going to talk about food, nutrition, and hydration. We're going to start out with water and hydration. And Frank told you a little bit about how it's still really important to hydrate in the winter. Sometimes even more so, and you are losing a lot of water. And we need to think about different things in the winter. For instance, water freezes. In the summer, a lot of people, they'll carry the hydration bladders and they're packed with the tube, which is convenient. But in the winter, you have to think about the possibility that that might freeze. And they do have tube insulators, but I have heard that those are also not reliable. So it's recommended to have a wide mouth bottle, and we boil our water and put it in the bottle. And then, as you can see, we put the bottle upside down. I have an insulator here. I got this at Eastern Mountain Sports, but a lot of places sell them, and it zips shut. And I carry this either on my waist strap or on my shoulder strap of my pack. And the water sits upside down so that if it does start to freeze, it freezes from the bottom and not the top. So I'll still be able to drink out of it. And then I usually carry minimum 2 liters of water on most of my my hikes in the winter. And so I'll have a second bottle. Sometimes it's tea, just to mix it up. And so I will put the second bottle either in a wool sock like this. So it's, most people have some sort of an old wool sock lying around, and that's a great insulator.
Or I also have a thermos, and sometimes I'll bring a little like chicken stock or something hot. It's really uplifting and it really warms you up fast to be able to have something warm to sip, when you have your brief stops. So that's something to think about. And just making sure that you're drinking enough water. Um, and food also freezes. So that's something to think about. The Snickers bar that you like to bring in the summer might take your teeth out in the winter. So if you want to bring granola bars or bars like that, cutting them up beforehand is a good idea, and bringing things that are just easier to eat. Taking wrappings off of things, because it's harder to unwrap food when you're wearing mittens or gloves, and sometimes it's so cold you don't want to take those things off. So bringing things like that, I carry like this little mini bottle here, and I put trail mix in it because trail mix doesn't usually freeze, and it's pretty easy to bring. And I'll have a little baggie of dehydrated fruit, and I always carry a nutty bar, and those usually are pretty good in the winter for me. So I always have that. And another thing to think about is having your food and your water easily accessible. As I said, I always carry like a water bottle in the insulator close to me so that I can grab it easily. I also often in the winter have a fanny or lumbar pack, a waist pack that I put snacks in, and I also put hand warmers in and my map and compass. That way, when I'm hiking, I don't have to take my pack off and deal with moving things around and trying to find things and then putting my pack on. And if I have happened to sweat, it's really cold and uncomfortable to put a pack on once you've cooled off even a little bit. So having pockets and things that you can have your food and your drink readily accessible is really important. And the great thing about winter hiking is that you can bring things that will keep longer than in the summer. Like I'll pre-peel some hard-boiled eggs and put some salt and pepper on and put them in a baggie and bring them hiking. Or a slice of pizza, which keeps better, in the winter than it does in the summer. So those are things to think about. And carrying more food than you might eat, because you burn more calories in the winter than you do in the summer. You're trying to keep your body warm, and your, trail breaking burns more calories. So you need to think about that and need to realize that you may need to eat more than you do in the summer. And you'd aim for 50 to 60% carbs, 15% protein, and 25 to 35% fat. So so sometimes when I'm hiking, and I'll start to feel a little sluggish and I'm like, oh gosh, I can't go. I'll put something in my mouth, just a quick snack, and you'd be amazed at the energy that you get from just making sure that you're fed well and that you're getting regular water. It's a huge energy boost just to do that. So those are things to think about. And as far as meals, breakfast is super important. Something that's going to get you off to a good start. Hot oatmeal. Sometimes I'll put hot oatmeal with peanut butter in it, or some eggs, or some pancakes, or just make sure that you're eating a really good, a substantial enough breakfast that's going to get you through. Don't skip breakfast. And for lunch in the winter, we don't really do lunch. We basically eat from the start of the hike to the end of the hike, and just little bits at a time. It's not really a full meal because you don't really want to stop for very long when it's really cold out. And at the end of the day, when you go home and you're doing dinner, that's the time to refuel. Pasta, rice dishes, beans, just refuel your body, because winter hiking, it's a good workout. So doing that and then getting lots of rest. Frank, do you have anything to add with food and water?
Bring stuff you want to eat to make sure you eat it. And sometimes I've heard people, they they get the idea that they're going to bring some kind of, like, I don't know, gimmick food or something, eat some kind of high energy bar or something like that, or and they get out there and they find out they hate eating high energy bars. So I mean, having the perfect food that you don't eat is much worse than having a not perfect food that you actually want to eat. So yeah, I would just say bring stuff you actually want to eat. So.
Oh, and also one thing with water, bring enough to get you through. And if it's a long backcountry hike, we bring a stove, because if your water sources are frozen over, melting snow gives you water. And usually you save a little bit of water and put it in the stove to get it started, and then add snow. If you run out of water, don't eat snow directly. Even just because it takes more energy to warm your body back up. If you're so, don't eat snow. Little helpful fact or tip. So here are some winter hiking guidelines, and if you want to add anything, Frank. Frank talked about anticipating the weather and trail conditions, and checking weather reports, checking trails, New Hampshire. I can't remember all the.
Yeah, we forgot to mention that. Yeah, checking the trail condition websites. That's definitely a good one. Just Google it. Just Google Mount whatever trail conditions, and you'll get a bunch of results.
Yeah. I think like newenglandtrailconditions.com might be one of them.
Yeah.
So and that's for like all over New England. So checking that, physical conditioning, hiking with snowshoes and carrying more weight. Like a couple of months before winter hiking season, I tend to load my pack with more stuff, just carrying more, because it's a difference. It's definitely a difference in pack weight between like summer and winter. And remember thermal management. You trying not to sweat too much, because if you stop and cool, you'll cool down too much, and it's easier to maintain a warmth than to have to get back up there if you get too cold. So in layering clothing, and everybody's different. What works for me will not work for Frank, and vice versa. And stay warm when stopped. When I'm on a group hike, I always, if I'm not the leader, I always ask somebody, how long is this going to take? Because I need to know how much I'm going to put on. So just taking care of yourself and making sure you're not getting too cold. Like as soon as you stop, if it's more than a few seconds, put something on. You don't want to get too cold and then have to work your way back up to a comfort level. And having and carrying the proper equipment for snow and ice, and knowing how to use it. We did not go over ice axes. That's not something we do in the beginner class. And if you are going to bring it and use it, having some training and knowing how to use it before bringing it. Otherwise, it's not going to do you any good. So knowing about your equipment. Navigating in winter conditions, map and compass skills are really important. And the Maine chapter of the AMC usually offers a map and compass skill around June every year. This year, not so much, but hopefully they'll continue it. But you can always look on YouTube. I've looked up map and compass skills, and there's actually so many really good ones on there just to get a familiarity with them. Don't depend on electronics. They're great to have, and hiking apps are great to have, but don't depend on them. I know All Trails is a really popular hiking app, but I've also seen a lot of not correct information in those. So don't rely solely on those, please. Have a map with you and know what direction you're going in. Food and water, plan for it freezing and plan for needing more calories. So bring more than you might think you need. Set realistic mileage goals. When you're breaking trail, something that would take you 2 miles an hour in the summer will take you maybe less than a mile an hour in the winter. It can be much slower. Frank and I have both broken trail through knee deep and higher snow before. It's hard. So set realistic mileage goals. It may take you much longer than you think it will. And carry contingency gear. Some of these are more for if you're hiking in the back country rather than something local, but a headlamp, foam pad, a sleeping bag, or at least an emergency bivvy, a first aid kit, which should be standard. And another thing that we hadn't mentioned that is nice to have, and I actually just recently got another one, is emergency locator beacon if you were really going way out in the back country. Things like, oh, I'm at a loss for that. I just got a Garmin InReach Mini that I can send an SOS to, and I can send text messages, and that requires a subscription. But it's something to look into if you're planning on doing more backcountry travel where your cell service is going to be unreliable.
I just mentioned just remember that they're not an automatic rescue button. they're nice to have, and they're good to stay in touch. But if you get yourself into a dangerous position, don't necessarily think you're going to press a button and have rescue workers come to a dangerous place to rescue you. That's not necessarily how it works. So
Right.
just the caveat.
Yeah, it a lot of times in the backcountry it takes hours for them to rescue, and if the weather conditions are dangerous for search and rescue, then it's going to be even longer than that. So good point, Frank. So turn back if conditions worsen or you are cold. So if things are getting worse and you're not going to meet your goals, turn back while you still have energy to, because the more that you push on, and the more that the worse you start to feel, the harder it's going to be to get out, and you're not going to have quite as much energy. So turn back if things get worse, or if you're feeling worse, if you're not able to warm up. Hike with a group, an experienced leader if possible. I know that with everything going on in the world right now, and we haven't been leading as many trips. I think there might be a few winter trips from the Maine chapter on the calendar right now. But if you can hike with your friends, and when we start leading more hikes again, hiking with a group and experienced leader, that's a great way to get more experience yourself and go with somebody who knows the trail, who studied it, who knows, who you can learn from, and that is just increases the safety aspects of it. And as Frank had said, don't hike in less than -15 degrees wind chill to start. I don't think we've mentioned leave no trace. So don't throw your banana peels on the ground. Take what you don't throw litter, and don't take things off. We didn't mention post holing. A lot of people don't like that. That post holing is when you are not wearing snowshoes and you are hiking on what you think is a packed trail or not a packed trail, and your leg pushes through the snow, sometimes up to your knee or more. That's post holing, and it kind of messes up the trail for other people. So if you think maybe you should be wearing snowshoes, just go ahead and wear them. I know some people say 99% will just need microspikes. But if you think you might need snowshoes, or if the conditions are soft, it's going to take less effort just to wear the snowshoes. And, staying on the trail, and, if it's a multi-use trail, not like with cross-country skiing, not stepping on the ski tracks, so that they can have a better experience. And just general etiquette, if you're going up a steep hill with a group, giving the person in front of you enough space in case they slide back, watching where you're putting your poles, just being considerate of other people and aware of your surroundings is really important. Do you have anything to add to that, Frank?
Well, I think, an important thing is the hiking with the group, in terms of a lot of the risk factors we were talking about, in terms of hypothermia and frostbite and those things, is having being with a group, helps to mitigate a lot of risk, in terms of many of the risks of winter hiking. So definitely, if you're starting out, seek out, I know it's difficult right now, but seek out people to hike with who are more experienced than you, and continue hiking with them. So
So I put together a list of Maine winter hiking recommendations. Now, this is just based on things that I have done. There are so many options, including, land trusts and preserves that are more local. So I'm gonna tout. There's a website called MaineTrailFinder.com that's pretty extensive for Maine, and you can go on there and do a search by like mileage and how strenuous it is and the location and miles from a certain town. When everything was happening back in the spring, when we were sort of on shutdown, I would go on there because it would also tell you what trails were open and closed, because a lot of trails had closed down. And it would, that way I found things I had never even hiked, and I've lived in Maine my whole life. So checking it out online and looking at those and going on like land preserves like Loon Echo Land Trust and Portland Trails is also a good way to find local ones, just to get started and practice snowshoeing. So I've listed these in order. So this is easy. Bradbury Mountain. Some people it's a state park in Pownell. This is actually a picture of it on New Year's Day one year, and you could, on a clear day, see all the way to Casco Bay. Mount Agamenticus in southern Maine. Douglas Mountain is a nice one. It's got sort of like a tower at the top and views of the lakes. The Libby Trails Forest, which I believe also does cross-country ski trails. And some people may be familiar with Pleasant Mountain. It's also called Shawnee Peak in Bridgeton, and there's multiple trails up to the summit. Ledges Trail is probably the most popular. It's got a few switchbacks. It's one of the shorter ones with great views along the way. Little Bigelow up in northwest Somerset. Rumford Whitecap in Rumford, and Burnt Mountain in Carabasset, and all of these have open summits, so they're amazing views. And for advanced, Old Speck Mountain, which is a 4,000 footer, and Puzzle Mountain, both of those are in Grafton Notch, Maine. And I've added strenuous, the Bigelows, Weston Avery Peaks in Carabasset Valley. And one thing to note in Maine, particularly when you're looking to go hiking, we have some roads that are seasonal that close, and actually in New Hampshire as well. So researching that and making sure the road is not closed. For instance, the Bigelows, the road to the trailhead's actually closed in the winter, but there is some parking at the beginning of the trail. But making sure that you are not parking in front of somebody's driveway, and just being aware of your surroundings and the legality of where you're parking is a good thing and to do. So,
and being aware that there may be additional mileage. Some hike you did in the summer may have 5 more miles tagged on top of it than it had in the summertime, because you got to do a road walk to get to the trailhead. So
absolutely. So I've included the AMC Maine chapter calendar, amcmaine.org/calendar. I do believe there's at least a couple of hikes that are already posted in the winter, and there may be more. That's updated periodically, so feel free to check that out. I've also included my email address, so if you have any questions after this presentation, or if you want me to email, I'm recording this right now, hopefully. If you want that emailed to you, I can do that, and it may take a little bit of time. I fell and kind of fractured my arm last week, so typing is a little bit hard for me right now. So just so you know, even the most experienced winter hikers or anytime hikers can have accidents. That's why we want to be extra prepared. So now I think we're going to take any questions, and I'm going to take a look at the Facebook Live, and it's kind of hard to read those. But if anybody has any questions, Frank, do you want to read off the Q&A, and we'll see if we can answer some of them, if there are any?
Yes. We have a couple questions here. Let's see. One back on the weather question. Do we check the point forecast from your phone if you have service at the trailhead? You certainly can do that. I would just say that shouldn't be the first time you check the weather for your hike. If you're if the only time you're checking your weather is at the trailhead on your phone, that's probably not the best of ideas, but definitely, yeah, if you can, even if you're at the summit and you have it and you can check the weather there and see what's going on, that's great. Just say that's just make sure you're checking it ahead of time too. So that's all I would say.
I have a question from Facebook, so
Yeah, what's that?
here. There aren't too many. I don't think it's hard to read all of them, but are you still moving along to keep up even as you are putting on layers, taking off layers, and putting away those items, or do you ask to stop? I would say ask to stop. I believe in being vocal when you need to do things, and you need to take care of yourself. And if you are with a group, they're not going to leave you behind, especially not like an AMC group. We're going to stop and make sure everybody is taken care of. So yes, speak up. I wouldn't try to like do all that stuff while moving. You got to take care of yourself.
Yeah, and also when you're part of a group is to remember there's always something you can be doing. If somebody needs to stop to fix a piece of gear or adjust layers or something like that, you can be eating or drinking or taking a bio break or doing something else to manage yourself and stay ahead of your needs at the same time. So just anytime you stop, just think about. So there's an acronym I've heard people use for thinking about in the wintertime. When you stop, you should always think about the acronym HELP, which is hydration, eating, layering, and P. P is for P. So always think about those four things every time you stop in the wintertime, and always be doing one of those four things every time you stop in the wintertime. So that's something to think about.
Crystal asks, when they say be bold, start cold, how cold should you be starting in the winter? I like that, actually.
Yeah.
I would say a little cold, like not intolerably cold. If you're shivering, if your hands are ice cold, that's too cold. If you're just a little bit uncomfortable, but if you're moving for a few minutes that you'll warm up, you really have to gauge how your comfort level and what you can tolerate. There are still some people who put all the layers on, but just know that doing that, you're going to heat up pretty fast and you're going to have to stop.
Yeah. So, and all of this, a lot of this depends on learning how your body reacts to exerting itself in the cold. I tend to be pretty warm, so I tend to take a lot of clothes off right when we start. I'm oftentimes down to my base layer even when we start, because I know I'm going to warm up. Other people might have insulating layers and a shell on, and they might keep it on for a long time. So you have to sort of learn how your body works and adjust to that. Work to that. Basically, don't one thing that people often fall into is they stop and see everybody else taking off or putting clothes on or something like that, and not really think about what exactly they need in terms of how much body heat they have. Don't necessarily throw a bunch of layers on just because you see other people throwing layers on. If you're really sweaty and hot, it may not be the right thing for you. So you have to learn that. Was there any more Facebook questions or?
Any advice for hiking in the cold with kids?
I don't really have any experience with that.
What I've heard is, we'll bring snacks, bring motivating food, and make sure to check in with them. I don't really have a huge amount. My son's a little bit older now, so I don't really have a huge amount of experience winter hiking with kids. Making sure they're comfortable. How kids like run around and don't like in t-shirt and shorts and don't, making sure that they're covered and comfortable, and, asking them and just teaching them basically, if you're getting too hot, take this off, teaching them about layering and treats, snacks, M&Ms. And starting with short hikes, short snowshoes, something local, and then going for hot chocolate after or something like that. I think making it fun.
You don't have to be a kid to get hot chocolate after. So
I did. There was one that we didn't really touch on that somebody asked on live. It's what is etiquette as far as pee goes?
I'm, in the wintertime, I feel like I know I'm guilty of not going very far off the trail. I mean, I think you don't want to do your business right on the trail, but it can be challenging to get too far off the trail in the wintertime because you might post hole or, have to wade through a lot of snow. So for me personally, it's at least get a few footsteps off the trail. Don't go right in the trail. I would say.
Yeah. So for me, because as a female going off trail, I don't go very far off trail in the winter because, as Frank said, there's things we call spruce traps where you get trapped and then somebody has to help you dig yourself out, or you have to dig yourself out. So I don't go very far off the trail. I go a little bit off the trail, and if I'm wearing snowshoes, I stomp down and make a space for myself, do what I have to do, and cover it up. Try to cover up things like that. It's part of Leave No Trace. Nobody wants to see that. So
Cool. All right. Any more on Facebook, or go to the Q&A here?
let's see. L'Oreal says teach kids to be responsible for their own gear as well, which is
that's a good thing. Definitely.
You can.
Yeah. So we have some clothing questions here. What fill amount do you recommend for a puffy jacket? Trying to think what mine is. I have a down one and a thinsulate one. I don't remember exactly what weight they are. Sometimes they come with a temperature rating. I feel like my down coat's heavier than my synthetic coat, but I can't say I specifically know what they are. I guess, I think with clothing, I think my general thing would be for clothing is that multiple lighter layers is always better than a smaller number of heavier layers. So buying a really super heavy puffy coat may not necessarily be the best strategy. Might be better to have two lighter puffy coats, but make sure they're sized so you can wear them both at the same time. That's how I have my puffy coats. So I don't know what you're feeling on that.
I like that. My feeling is that as far as my puffy is an 850 downfill, which is pretty good, but that's for, when we go into Baxter State Park in the winter, it's for like really cold conditions, for me, or at least, negative conditions. So I think if you were going to look for a fill amount for the winter, probably something between 700 and 850, maybe 600. It really depends on your comfort level and what conditions you're going to go out in, really. We have in the past gone out in some pretty chilly weather, so some like negative temperatures. So we've had things to prepare for that.
Cool. All right. Do you only need hard shell pants when you're at the summit? Are rain pants okay for that? So personally, the hard shell pants I have are a heavy pair of rain pants that I carry. They're basically the rain pants I carry pretty much anytime. They're pretty substantially heavy. I think one aspect of rain pants we didn't cover on that's very useful is that they have full zips on them, because that can be really handy if you need to put them on while you have snowshoes on. And in terms of when you need them, I guess that's more kind of the question, is asking when you need them. So for me, hard shell pants are needed when we get into some situation where there's high wind. Generally is when I need them. So yes, that can oftentimes be the summit, because that's when you're above tree line, which is when the wind is generally the worst. So I would say yes, in general, my hard shell pants are only for when I'm at the summit, and I will only go to the trouble of putting them on if I think I'm going to be in that condition for a while. And in my case, they are a heavy pair of rain pants. They're one and the same. They're just something that's waterproof, windproof, and breathable, basically. Yeah. So any pant that fits that characteristic. So you, Denise, is yours the same?
I feel the same way, although mine don't feel very breathable.
No, mine aren't breathable at all. Breathability is a lie. Let's face it. That's just marketing speak. There's no breathability is, zippers are the way to make your clothing breathable, or zippers.
Pretty much, yeah. So
Yeah.
I do it. I only wear them in the winter for the wind, and they help
Yeah.
so much when it's really windy.
Yeah.
Now.
Yeah. So let's see here. If it's very cold, could you use your light down puffy as an active layer over the fleece? Is there a risk of perspiration wetting out the down? Some of the downs these days are quote unquote treated, right, to have some moisture resistance, but ultimately I think that only lasts so long. So you always do need to be cognizant of how much you're sweating, because clothing that gets wet, particularly down, I don't know how much we necessarily touched on that in the discussion of down versus synthetic, but down generally will lose, if it gets too wet, will lose its insulating properties, while synthetic stuff, if it gets too wet, will still retain more of its insulating properties, although some of the treated down these days is supposed to be better. I've never tested its limits, but in general, you could absolutely wear a lighter jacket while you're being active, but I would be extremely cognizant of how warm you're getting. And once you have the first sign that you're really starting to sweat quite a bit, I would get that layer off, because you start getting wet layers and they start losing their effectiveness. And so you want to try to preserve. I always think about trying to preserve my clothes as dry as possible throughout the course of the hike in the wintertime. And I'll oftentimes carry things that I know will get wet. I'll carry extra of, like mitts, for example. My mitts always get wet, so I have at least one spare pair of mitts, if not two spare pairs of mitts, to be sure that I have something dry to put on there. So yeah, that's my feeling. Denise, what do you think?
I guess I've always managed to, if it's very cold, still with just my fleece, and I wear my base layer, which is a long sleeve. Usually it's a thermal. Between the two of those, but I think I probably have worn my down, at least not going downhill, because it is one of those treated ones, and I've never had a problem with it. Once I start to warm up enough that I know that I'm sweating and perspiring and I can feel it, I'll change. But I have occasionally worn my down, at least going downhill, and it's been okay. My puffy.
All right, I've gotten mixed messages about soft shell versus hard shell pants. I mean, I guess I would say I always wear soft shell pants. Soft shell meaning something that is not windproof, not waterproof, maybe slightly wind resistant or water resistant, but not fully waterproof or windproof, being soft shell, and hard shell being something that is wind and waterproof. So I would say I always wear soft shell pants and carry hard shell pants, and put hard shell pants on only if I need them. I've seen other people wear hard shell pants. I'm too warm to do that in the wintertime. That's hard for me to do in the wintertime because it's just too hot. So
I agree.
Nice. Yeah. So yeah.
But
but I think to drive home a point there that it's to each their own. Everybody is different. Everybody's bodies are different, and how they produce heat in the wintertime is different. So wearing long underwear and a hard shell pant might be perfect for you. Try it out and see if it works for you. Just watch your, just watch your sweat. That's all. Manage it. Will the standard isobutane backpacking stove work fine in the wintertime? That's like, I presume they're meaning the compressed canister stoves. Yeah. So you want to talk about that?
Sure. It's recommended when it's extremely cold to use white gas stoves. However, nowadays I I have a hard time with some words. Isobutane. Those stoves, they come with sort of a different mixture now, that's better in cold weather. But I'd still, like, if you feel that you're going to use them, put the canister in your jacket or somehow warm it up before you use it. But I know that a lot of people will still bring like their jet boils, and they carry the canister closer to their body to keep it warm, and if they know that they're going to use it. But as far as like extreme cold, the white gas, like the MSR universal white gas stoves, things like that, are supposed to be better for like extremely cold weather.
And it's so fun lighting them. Particularly indoors. That's lots of fun. So thank you so much. You're welcome. Is there a backpack you would recommend? Brand, features, size? I would primarily recommend one that's comfortable on you. That's the biggest thing, is go to the store and try a whole bunch on with weight in them. Usually they have like the sandbags at the store to make something comfortable. I think we generally said something around 40 liters or more, because you got to carry extra stuff in the wintertime, and be prepared to, when you look at it, make sure there looks like there's a way to attach your snowshoes to it, because you are going to spend a large amount of your time carrying your snowshoes, not wearing them. So you need to be prepared to carry them. So think about how you're going to attach that. Is there good attachment points for your snowshoes? What are the general features of a backpack would you think for the winter, Denise?
Well, that plus pockets, like waist pockets to store your food in, a big enough pocket if you're going to put, like a wide mouth bottle in a side pocket, and straps, definitely straps. I think, Frank, you might have actually attached extra straps at one point to your packs for things.
Yeah, I just have I use like for attaching snowshoes, I use just the like 1 inch wide nylon straps with the plastic clip buckles kind of thing. Some people use bungees.
I just use
But
the compression straps when I do use them.
yeah,
So making sure that they have those. And like Frank said, whatever's comfortable. And I know that there are some packs like the Gregory packs and the Ospreys are pretty popular in the Deuter, and there's probably other ones. Those are just some of the more popular ones. But really, everybody's so different that trying on them is important.
yeah, definitely. Was there something else I was thinking about there? I can't now. If I remember, I'll come back to it. Leave no trace in number 2 in the winter. I'll admit, I try to avoid number 2 in the winter unless there's an outhouse. I mean, that's one thing is, sometimes you'll go by places in the backcountry where there are outhouses you can use. I try to use those, but I don't know what is the official rule on number 2 in the winter. I'll be honest, I don't have enough experience with it to know.
Pack it out, quite honestly, because in the that sort of thing doesn't. It's probably still going to be there when the snow melts. I carry a doggy bag, like a dark colored doggy bag, if I needed to, and try to pack it out if you can. And if you can't, go as far away as you can and bury it as deep as you can. But ideally, packing it out. But I try not to.
Avoid it.
I just want to get a couple of the ones from.
Yeah.
Is foot powder helpful in addition to liners, helping to address moisture? I've never had a problem with moist feet in the winter.
Yeah, I mean, sock preferences, I would, again, I wear exactly the same sock combination in the summertime as the wintertime. I don't wear a different sock combination. So if you have a sock combination that works for you in the summertime, I would recommend just starting with that same combination for the winter time. I wouldn't think any reason to change it. You know, some people like liners, some people don't like liners. I would stick with whatever you're used to. And
There's
yeah.
another
What's that?
question you might be able to answer based on, I think it was last year in Baxter. If you are fording a frozen stream in fall, what's the best method for drying out? I know it was not funny at the time.
Oh yeah, so well, Denise is alluding to a story in which I fell into a stream when it was like 30 below zero in Baxter State Park last year, or yeah, 2 years ago. Anyway, yeah. So in that particular instance, I fell into a stream. It was cold. I was not alone, for starters. I was with several other people, so that was good for starters because they sort of were able to help me get stuff out of my pack and get changed as much as possible. I didn't fully change. I had a spare shirt in my pack, so I got a dry shirt on, and I had some dry insulating layers that I got on, and that was enough to get me back to the cabin. You know, it's good that this is the importance of wearing stuff that even when it's wet retains much of its insulating properties. You know, that's why we say don't wear cotton, because cotton does not maintain its insulating properties when it gets wet. If I had fallen in a stream at 30 below zero wearing all cotton, I would have been in a much more serious place than falling into a stream wearing a bunch of synthetic clothing. So that was good. You know, I got as much dry clothing on as I could, and I kept moving I ate food and I kept moving to try to generate heat and get back. So yeah, so I mean, I guess the question was how do you deal with being wet in the wintertime, basically, or falling in a stream? Yeah, it's be cognizant. You know, this is something where reading trail reports is a good thing. Understand before you go what if there are stream crossings on the trail you're going on. What are those stream crossings like? Are there established ice bridges over them, snow bridges over them? You know, you reach a point in the wintertime where a lot of these there's enough snowfall over these streams that there's, you know, solid snow bridges across them. In this particular case, we were kind of early winter, and this particular spot hadn't established a great snow bridge over it, and I got kind of too near the edge of the one that was partially established there, and it collapsed on me and I fell in. I actually went back to that same spot about a month later, and there was a full snow bridge right across it, so it was no big deal. So, you know the conditions before you go. Don't go alone. Bring some extra clothes. It's always a good thing. We got bio breaks for women. Any tips on not freezing your butt? I'll defer to you on that one.
No, you're gonna freeze your butt. They do have things, female urination devices that you can get that kind of look like funnels. I have not personally tried them. I don't go far off trail. I go as fast as I can. I hike a lot in insulated skirts as well, so that I don't know if that really keeps me any warmer, but at least if somebody's coming up the trail, there's a little bit of coverage. But yeah, that's one of the few things about winter hiking is that might be a little bit cold. So, but the thing is, holding it will make you colder. So when you need to go to the bathroom, you might as well just do it, and it'll make you feel better.
What is the AMC policy if someone needs to turn back? Does everyone turn around, or does the group split up? So I would say the AMC has a firm policy of starting, finishing, and remaining as a group throughout the entire hike. You know, when I lead hikes, I try to be very clear about that with all the participants. And that's not just even, I've often screened participants off of a hike who I thought would hike too fast. because I thought they would not be willing to stay with the group if the group hiked slower than I was anticipating they would hike. So I try to be sure, I guess, that I design a group that is going to stay together, and that is the policy of the AMC, to remain together as a group.
There have been instances where there were groups that where there were two leaders and somebody wanted to turn back or needed to turn back, and they've split up because they've had two leaders, one leader staying with half the group and one leader staying with whoever. But we never, if somebody's going to turn around, they're not going by themselves. We don't split up that way. And we would the only situation where they would split up a group is if there were two full leaders to do that.
Mm-hmm. I see a related question over in the chat here that popped up. Do you design groups and hikes based on age? I think other than I don't do hikes with minors. I don't with people 18 and under. I only do hikes that have adults on them.
They have so it's open to everyone. The AMC leads hikes open to everyone over the age of 18, unless it's a leader who can take children under that age. But there's the 20s and 30s group for people under 40, and that's open to all ages, but it's geared toward people in their 20s and 30s. And then I think there's another group, sometimes you'll see an advertisement for over 55. But again, although those are advertised that way, they're open to everyone. So that's the only thing that I can think of. Most of my hikes are geared to just anyone. We'll screen people based on experience, just making sure that everybody can do whatever it is that we're going to do that day.
At 800 plus, I think someone was recommending 800 plus down or higher. General guess for weight of your winter hike day pack, I'm going to say upper 20s, 30, somewhere around there, something like that, maybe. That's what I'm guessing.
I'm guessing too. I've weighed my backpacking pack, and I've never weighed I'm going to do that. I'll weigh my pack for this winter when I'm allowed to go winter hiking again, and and then I'll be able to answer that question. It's probably upper 20s, maybe 25, 26, something like that.
Let's see. Can zippers freeze under certain conditions? I imagine they could. Yeah, I think they could. Again, if they get wet and they freeze, I suppose that could happen, I feel like generally most of the time your body's generating enough heat. I think the real thing there would be, again, getting stuck in a windy condition. Again, going back to the theme of wind being the primary indicator of comfort in the wintertime. It's harder, as was seen in that hypothermia little diagram we had earlier, showing the wind blowing your body heat away, that when there's wind around you, that just takes away all your body heat. And so I could see the wind causing your clothes to ice up and your body not generating enough heat, or getting too wet. Again, it's a sweat management thing. So much of winter hiking comes down to sweat management, making sure you stay as dry as possible by adjusting your layers. Or the alternative theory there is you can adjust your layers and you can adjust your pace to your layers. That is another alternative. If you have too many layers on and you simply can't take them off for whatever reason because it's too windy, for example. I've certainly been in that condition where it's too windy for me to take my clothes off, take layers off because I'm worried about frostbite. So in those cases, I have to moderate my pace in order to try to not sweat too much. So that is an alternative approach to sweat management as well. So, but yeah. Have you ever had a zipper freeze, Denise?
I have never had a zipper freeze.
No.
I've had zippers get stuck from like, I don't know, wetness in the summer, but yeah. That was just,
I've had clothes freeze in my bag.
Oh my gosh.
I've had that happen. Sometime if a layer gets too wet, I've had a layer get too wet, and I either abandon it and put it in my pack not to wear it again, and then I get back to the trailhead and take it out of my pack and it's like frozen. I've had that happen, but yeah. So
Never my pack.
yeah.
Great. So it looks like we've answered the questions. I think we're gonna wrap this up.
Mhm.
Do you have any more? Are there any more?
I was just seeing if there's anything over in the chat that got put in here. Somebody asking about negative 40-degree boots. I think negative 40-degree boots are like, those are like the heavy boots that Denise showed in the video about her gear. You know, I mean, for super cold conditions, those are something I don't know if I'm specifically know which boots we're talking about there exactly, but you know, I mean, in a cold enough condition, a cold enough boot a warm enough boot like that can certainly be good. You know, in non-cold conditions, a boot like that is that warm can be annoying because your feet are really hot. So, you know, it's a double-edged sword. Yeah.
And temperature ratings can be a little misleading since everybody's
Yeah.
different, you know. So it's kind of, you just have to sort of know yours. You know, like my feet get really cold. I wear 400 grams most of the time, you know, except during shoulder seasons. Shoulder seasons, that season between, you know, like right before winter and right after winter, where you don't quite know what to bring or carry. So
Yeah.
yeah, so
Somebody here suggested investigating the weight of the down itself, not necessarily just the fill. That a heavier weight with a lower fill number can actually be warmer, I guess. I admit I'm not totally up on the subtleties of down weights, but something to consider. Yeah, well, it looks like it over here. So.
and thank you. It looks like there's some people with some experience too who are offering advice,
Yeah.
which is great. So we're gonna wrap this up. This video should be eventually put on our YouTube channel at AMC Maine. I do, I'm not sure when that's gonna happen because I don't do that. But this video should also be available on the Facebook page. I think the live version stays up there as a recording. And if anybody wants a recording of this, feel free to email me. And I guess hopefully we'll get some more trips on the calendar. And thank you, Frank, for taking time out.
Thank you for organizing things, Denise.
Workshop. Hopefully we'll see you in person sometime soon.
Yeah, right. One of these days.
Thank you all for coming. And yeah, if you have any questions, you know, feel free to reach out. Have a good night, everybody.